Hi there. I see there are a number of people who have started to join us. We're going to let a bulk of the registrants come in, so give us a couple of minutes as we all get ready to get started. Hi there. For those who are joining us, we're going to give it a couple of minutes to allow the people who have registered to join us, and then we'll get started. Peggy, you had asked a question. Can we see or hear you? We can see you are on as an attendee, but you will your microphone will be muted until we get to the question and answer session. But yes, we can see. I saw your name. All right, we're getting more and more attendees. Probably wait one more minute and then we'll get started. Okay, we are about 5 minutes after our start time, so I think we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. My name is Mary Catherine Gibbs. I am the land use attorney for HRP, the owner of the Potomac River Generating Station site. I want to welcome you all to what is now our 15th community engagement event that HRP has organized to discuss the redevelopment of the PRGS site. Tonight, we'll be discussing the initial plans and getting community input for the publicly accessible open spaces on and around the PRGS site. Before we begin, there are a few items that we would like to review to ensure that everyone is still comfortable using Zoom. Audience members, please note you are muted on both audio and camera. We do this to ensure that you are able to efficiently review the materials and so that we can answer all your questions. And if you are interested in asking those questions or making comments, we ask that you either submit them through the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, or raise your hand in the question and answer period that will take place after we finished our presentation. We do ask that people who are asking questions verbally do so in a respectful time frame and manner so that as many people as possible get the opportunity to have their questions and comments addressed. If you want to submit your questions in writing, you can click on the Q&A icon, where you'll be then prompted to type and submit your questions. We will try to log all questions on our end. The chat box function will not work. We will be gathering questions received during this meeting and will answer as many as we can during the question and answer session. Any questions that we're unable to cover in the time allotted will be saved so we can provide written answers to all and post them on our website in a couple of weeks. We are also recording this meeting and we'll be posting a recording of it on our website as well. For those of us who are joining by phone, and I believe we have one, you can also send in questions and comments by email to hrpinfo.midatlantic@hilcoglobal.com. We'll be doing our best to check this email to ask and answer these questions during the meeting. If we're not able to answer your question due to time limitations, we will share the answer along with all the other questions asked on our website at www.hrpalx.com, where the answers to all of the questions asked in any of our community meetings are posted. As has been true of all of our community engagement events, there is plenty of opportunity for community participation tonight. We're here to listen to your comments and answer your questions, excuse me, to the greatest extent we can. We'll be covering a lot of information, but we'll leave plenty of time for questions, and we can always go back to a slide during questions and answers if you'd like. Again, thank you for being here tonight, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. As part of the overall process for the redevelopment of the entire PRGS site, we discussed open space earlier in January of 2022 during the Coordinated Development District, or CDD, part of the process. HRP released an initial poll that over 200 members of the public filled out in late 2021 in order to gain the community's ideas for how HRP could provide new and enhanced open spaces in and around the site. Based on that input, a general guide to the open space plan was part of the CDD concept plan approved last July. After that approval, HRP took the input from that survey and created an initial concept plan for the publicly accessible open space on and around the site. As you are likely aware, HRP created a more in-depth survey based on those concepts that seeks additional community input related to how to implement that general plan. The survey was opened on May 1st and will remain open until May 31st. In addition, we're holding this community meeting to solicit further community input on this planning process for all of these open spaces. We want your input in that survey. And if you haven't already, you can use this QR code to open the survey and answer it at your convenience before it closes on May 31st. It is available in 4 different languages. I'm now going to turn things over to Melissa Schrock of HRP.
Thanks, Mary Catherine. My name is Melissa Schrock, and I am the Executive Vice President of the Mixed Use Development Team at HRP. We're excited to welcome all of you tonight to this focused meeting on open space design. Those of you that participated in the CDD process that Mary Catherine just described, and I see some familiar names on here, will probably recognize this slide. These were some of the approaches that we laid out during the CDD phase that really set out the vision for the physical redevelopment of the site. Number one, obviously, we want to reintegrate this piece of land into the surrounding urban fabric. It was cut off from the city for well over 70 years. And so by reintroducing the street grid in a thoughtful fashion, we are able to reknit it back into the city. Also, as I'm sure many of you experienced, it was not only an island in the Old Town North neighborhood, but it was also a bit of a wall blocking folks from the neighborhood to access to the waterfront, and blocking folks who are walking along the waterfront or cycling along the waterfront from getting up into Old Town North. So we want to connect people to the waterfront. And then the third one related to this is to provide meaningful and varied open space, so both active and passive recreational opportunities across the 14 acres of open space that the project will either create or improve. And then our fourth principle was added as part of the CSS, or Coordinated Sustainability Strategy process, that we have been going through in this phase, and that is to create a sustainable new place. So tonight's meeting is really going to be focused on this third principle: provide meaningful and varied open space. However, it touches all of the principles. So now I'm going to turn it over to Simon Beer from our landscape architect.
Thank you, Melissa. Appreciate that. As Melissa said, my name's Simon Beer. I am a principal with OJB Landscape Architecture, and I'm really excited to be here tonight to talk with you about this exciting development and the open space that it brings with it. You know, one of the things as we're looking at this site and how special it is the continuity of open space in Alexandria, in particular along the waterfront. And we do see this project as a beautiful capstone to Old Town North and its ability to bring people to the waterfront, really culminating in nearly 14 acres of open space here, just above Tide Lock Park. And several of those acres are currently on National Park Service land or on Norfolk Southern land. However, with this project, we're tearing down the walls and the fences, opening up the open space to the property, and as Melissa mentioned, improving and enhancing the open space in coordination with those property owners. And again, we think that the figure diagram of the new green space here, in combination with the line of beautifully landscaped and open space areas along the waterfront, will be a great improvement. Now, to look at some of the existing open space that's there today, or existing infrastructure, I should say, it obviously has a strong industrial character. A big part of the conversation that we've been having with the community is the demolition of the power plant and the reintegration of an urban grid that brings you to the waterfront. Several of you may be familiar with the what we call the cage here along the waterfront, and that's where the Mount Vernon Trail runs through and connects you from north and south. Along with that, we'll be making improvements to this area, along with the adaptive reuse potentially of the pump house that is located right adjacent to it. We see different industrial relics such as the railway and several industrial pieces here that we can see in some of the imagery. And again, we'd love to have a discussion tonight about reintegration of the character of the site to speak to the open space and the vibrancy of the neighborhood. So Melissa outlined several of the overall project's design principles, and we'd love to run through some more specific open space design principles that we've been thinking about, and we'd love to touch on those with you. First, kind of talking about the general approach and access to the site. We really do want to protect and sustain the culture and natural integrity of the site. And then seamlessly connect PRGS and the adjacent park spaces together. So again, HRP has committed to making improvements and enhancements to those adjacent properties, while also having a great continuous flow onto the PRGS property. Expanding waterfront access and views, enhancing trail infrastructure, maintaining and improving safety for all trail users along the Mount Vernon Trail and off the Mount Vernon Trail, whether you're a pedestrian or biker. That also includes the potential widening, the planned widening, I should say, of the Mount Vernon Trail. And we'll touch on that in just a little bit on the slide coming up. And then as we get to the program of the site, right now it's a fairly passive program on the National Park Service land with the expansion of the multiple acres of open space. We think that there's going to be an ability for us to vary the program abilities here and connect more with the water and the waterfront vistas, provide open spaces that have a flexibility of different uses. Also introduce some educational opportunities, whether that's about the Potomac River or the history of the site itself or Old Town North in general. We do feel like there's an ability to create that cohesive open space even between varied program uses, whether they're passive or active. And then, of course, inclusive design for multi-generations and all different types of users is a big, important design principle for us as well. In terms of natural resources, we want to enhance the ecological value of the site, remove invasives and dead trees, continue to plant native and succession vegetation within the site, and promote flood mitigation and resiliency throughout. This also includes reestablishment or a new establishment of an urban tree canopy throughout the site. So zooming into the site a little bit more and talking more specifically about the adjacent property owners and the PRGS property, HRP's PRGS property, we can see over to the east side along the Potomac River in this kind of more faint green, the National Park Service land. You can see the Mount Vernon Trail running through and actually bifurcating then onto the HRP property as we come in front of the pump house and along this peninsula to the north. We'll dive into that in a little bit further. Today, we're going to focus on the waterfront open space and the rail corridor open space, but just wanted to also touch that later on the project is going to be focused on delivering a waterfront plaza as part of the development, and also open space associated with what we call the Pepco liner running along the Pepco substation here. And so we'll kind of move on and talk more specifically about that waterfront open space. So again, the views here to the river are a huge asset. There's a lot of topography that's happening from the onset of the site and to the water level. And that kind of varies as you go from south to north. You get down closest to the water when you're adjacent to the pump house in the bike cage here. But let's dive in and talk more specifically. So on the PRGS property, there's 2.8 acres of land. And we also have 5.3 acres of land associated with the National Park Service. And that's where the Mount Vernon Trail runs through. And I did want to note that this QR code that you see here at the bottom left-hand corner will give you more information on that Mount Vernon Trail widening. And that's going to be on the National Park Service website. We have been working in close connection with them. And of course, any improvements that'll be made on the National Park Service will be approved by them. And they'll also be reviewing the plans in regards to the adjacent HRP property. But our goal overall is to find harmony and seamlessness in the connections between, but keeping the vernacular of a National Park Service open space. So as we started thinking about the programming and the potentials for the site here, I think that in previous conversations, we've talked about this gradient of passive and active uses, in particular to the north of the site, which you can see in the key plan over here is highlighting this northern portion where there's quite a bit of National Park Service property that comes along this water's edge with the Mount Vernon Trail. And also has a great established canopy coverage that's there today in this woodland zone. You can see some of the topographical changes that occur at the shoreline, allowing for great prominent views back to the Capitol and across the Potomac River. And in terms of program here, we're continuing to think about how can we utilize this naturalistic, beautiful asset of this woodland at the bluffs to enhance the experience for people. A few things that we've thought about are these overlooks, woodland walks, some ecological education to talk about the native forestry that's happening within the site. Of course, integrated seating for people to be able to take breaks along the way. And then also in discussion with the National Park Service and kind of still working through some of the schematics and ideas for it, but the potential for a kayak launch at the Potomac River, in particular at one of the lower elevation areas that the Mount Vernon Trail reaches down to. And with that, we'll associate some kayak drop-off and storage so that people would be able to easily access this waterfront, even though there's quite a bit of topographical change and natural vegetation throughout. As we move a little further south, there's this area at the existing pump house, and we'd shared that kind of bike cage that runs along the front. Well, this is certainly one area that we want to open up and make feel more accessible and more publicly usable for the general public and for people of Alexandria. So with that, we're looking at improving that connection in front of the pump house, and the potential adaptive reuse of that could include waterfront dining and different program ideas for that. We also have terrace seating that allows you to accessibly get down to the waterfront from the development, but also find areas to sit, relax and enjoy and look out towards the water with prominent views. Another element that kind of rings the edge of this central waterfront is the Woonerf, and that's a roadway that's a shared pedestrian and vehicular roadway with great porosity between the waterfront and the central urban plaza between Block E and Block C. And within these zones adjacent to it, we see potential for a great lawn for different program activities that may come out. We have been imagining the idea of concerts or movie nights with views out to the Potomac, and a lot of ability for the public to come and enjoy the open space within this area. Along with that, reestablishment of native meadow throughout, helping to reestablish the grades throughout the area here, and bring in some great pollinator plants that would be located throughout the waterfront here as well. As we move a little bit further south, the waterfront area starts to encapsulate Block A, and Block A is an intended arts use potential for that site, and think that there's some good combination of ability for outdoor program and that arts use to be incorporated, including a flexible lawn with the potential of seating around that lawn to give you great views towards activities that may be happening, different program events that may occur in association with the arts use. Thinking about flexible outdoor space, in particular with ground floor retail associated with Block A. And then, as this is really your first experience of the development coming in from Fairfax Street, a prominent access into the site, we think of this as almost a welcome plaza that we think could incorporate some of the historic railways that run through this zone too. We're thinking about the ability to reinterpret that in a way that mixes well with the program and abilities to use the site to its fullest potential moving forward. So as we jump into the second open space for discussion tonight, this is going to be the Rail Corridor Open Space and Old Town North Linear Park Segment 2. You can see that this is generally a relatively long and narrow stretch of land associated with railway that runs through on Norfolk Southern land. Again, in combination with potential rails to trails conversion, we think that there's ability to bring in program here, but still keep some of the relic and character of what's happening here currently on site. So to look at that a little closer, you can see the split of this linear open space between the dark green color, which is about 2 acres, and that's on the PRGS property, and the adjacent property of Norfolk Southern, just over 3 acres. There's currently a city bike trail that connects to the Mount Vernon Trail as well that runs through this zone. And the great thing about these two open spaces being designed together is that we'll be able to experience different program, especially as we get further north and the space opens up, some more ability to introduce active programming and different zones for multi-generational users. So we'll kind of dive into some of the program thoughts for that. And as you move from the waterfront along Block A, where we were just talking about that southern portion of the waterfront area, we really do envision this to be a little bit more of a passive zone transitioning from the waterfront. Again, it's the first experience that people may have as they enter into the site, whether from Fairfax Street or North Royal Street. There's also a guardhouse here that we're also looking at the adaptive reuse for that, the potential for restrooms or potentially a bike repair shop of some sort. And as we continue to move through the linear park, pedestrian circulation will be a priority. Bicycle circulation will also be a priority out to the George Washington Memorial Parkway in Abington. However, with the potential of these two properties together, we're going to be able to split those trails and keep pedestrians and bicycles safely separated. But again, the multi-use trail can continue through. There's a relatively light amount of grade as we are approaching from the south. A berm kind of continues to occur as you move further north, sloping down into the property. You can see the existing trees, windrow that exists today. There aren't too many existing trees on this particular stretch of property, but we are definitely looking at preserving healthy trees that are there today and designing with them, but also increasing the canopy, the urban canopy here with new forestation that go well with the program assets and the potential for that on site. So with those program assets, we're thinking about the potential for a dog run, potentially multi-sport recreation courts, location for dynamic kids play here, as well as welcoming plazas and even kind of more urban zones that help introduce you into the site and the different programs throughout. So I do want to touch on an important aspect today, and we do have some questions in the open space survey. And as Mary Catherine mentioned, if anyone hasn't had an opportunity to take the online survey, we'd love for you to do that. And the QR code is in the upper right-hand corner for anyone who hasn't taken that yet. But we wanted to speak on historic interpretation, in particular with such a rich history of the site. Obviously, over the past 50 years, it's had quite an industrial heritage. But even before that, looking back at the history, there's a strong Native American culture, the use of the Potomac River as their kind of lifeblood through the ages then. And then it started to transition into more of an agricultural base where there were some plantations that were located on the site historically. And even African-American heritage and life in this site have a prevalent narrative as well. And think that all those stories have the opportunity to be told. There's several different ways for us to do that through texture, narrative, and forms. And we'd love to share just a few different ways that we've seen this happen in other different projects. So on the left side here, you can see texture through industrial aesthetic, whether that's shade trellises or children's play elements, salvaged and recycled materials, native plantings, kind of speaking back to the history of the Native American life here along the Potomac River. As we get into narrative, there's some ability for using words and expression, whether that's through art or interpretive signage, all sorts of options to do that within the open space here as well. And then, of course, forms, maybe not being quite as literal to some of the textures or narrative, but reinterpreting some of the past uses in the way that the landscape is formed around these open spaces. And so it's been a pleasure talking through some of the kind of high level thinking and programming aspects to this. I'm going to turn it over to Mary Catherine to talk a little bit about steps forward and how we'd like to continue to get your community input for the open space moving forward.
Thanks, Simon. Appreciate it. As we discussed earlier, after soliciting early input on the open spaces on the site during the CDD part of this process, HRP created an initial concept plan, what's called a concept 1 plan for the publicly accessible open spaces on and around the site. And we submitted that to the city earlier this month. HRP created this more in-depth survey we've been talking about, released it to the public for your input on May 1st, and it will remain open until May 31st. Based on the comments that are received in that survey, as well as those we hear during this community meeting, HRP will continue to refine the concepts and plans for these open spaces with the goal of submitting what's called the Concept 2 submission for the open space development special use permits, or DSUPs. If you've participated in this process, you know there's a lot of acronyms that are part of it. We will have an additional community meeting this fall after that Concept 2 plan is submitted. And all of this is moving us forward towards a review of those plans by the Park and Rec Commission, as well as by the Planning Commission and the City Council in early 2024. Now we look forward to answering your questions as best we can. Remember, you can either ask questions in writing or verbally, and we'll be going back and forth from written questions to verbal questions as we move forward. So here we go. All right. Let's start with a written question, if I could. There's one I just wanted to make sure that they heard got answered as part of the presentation. As part of connecting to the waterfront, will there be any boat ramps for boats or personal watercraft? And one is proposed on the waterfront in the northern section of the waterfront open space that is in an area that is controlled by the Park Service, and we're working with them on how to move that forward, but that is proposed. The next one, will any public parking be provided? We are, Simon, if you can go to the plan set that's after this page. As you can see, we are creating an entirely new roadway network. And so as part of that, there will be public parking spaces all along Road A, which is this entire spine road that goes all the way on the western side of the property. There will also be underground parking garages, portions of which will be accessible to the public for both the retail uses on the site and arts uses on the site. So yes, there will be public parking provided. Let's see if we have a hand up. I think we have one. Can you unmute Mr. Byrne, Corey?
Yes, I'm very concerned about this linear park project. This is going to destroy, even when you say there's one alternative, you might make it a combination. This is going to destroy one of Alexandria's major historical resources. This is the last remaining rail line from Alexandria's old historical rail line, dating back before the Civil War. Well, creating this into a park, or even with some interpretation, is simply going to destroy this historical resource. It's Norfolk Southern, of course, owns it. It's still very intact. There used to be rail lines along Union Street. There was one along Wilkes Street. All gone. Now you are doing this basically to satisfy bikers who want a wide trail so they can separate pedestrians and cyclists. That's not necessary. There's not going to be enough traffic up there. The main thing is, are you considering just leaving this thing alone and preserving it, including some of the sidings on the Hilco property? You wouldn't.
Ma'am, I need you to.
So are you considering just leaving that linear park alone and just saving the tracks and all the signals and everything else that's there?
Mary Catherine, maybe I'll start and you can jump in.
Yep.
Well, thank you. We appreciate your perspective. I think I would say a couple of things. Number one, the city laid out in their small area plan the vision for the conversion of this rail spur line into a linear park. And I'm sure you know this, Mr. Byrne, that extends beyond just the length of our property. So I think there's potential that certain parts of it may be conserved over time. I don't think that there's been a full scale design of what's going to happen along the entire length of it should the city be successful in the rails to trails conversion. Certainly what we've heard from most people in the community is the desire for different types of recreational environments. That's not only for cyclists, but that's one of the things that we're doing with our open space survey right now, is trying to collect preferences from people in the community so that we understand the kinds of programs and the kinds of facilities that people would like to see here. The other thing that's a little different about this part of the spur line rather than other lengths of it is that obviously it abuts our land where we have some extra space, and so it can be a little bit wider, and it makes it accommodating, or allows that area to accommodate some larger programmatic elements. I don't know, Mary Catherine, if you had anything to add to that.
I think that's actually spot on, Melissa. I think one of the things that was a big part of the Old Town North Small Area Planning process was the discussion of how to reuse what is now an abandoned rail line, and then it is overgrown currently with vegetation. But I think you're absolutely right that there is the full planning for that linear park hasn't been finished yet. And so that we don't know what, if any of that rail line will be maintained. Currently now in Orinoco Bay Park in the city south of us, we do have a park and that rail line still standing with a trail next to it. So, this is all going to be part of this planning process. So I think it's a good question, and thank you for that. So let's go back to some of the written questions. One of the written questions was, will the existing railway tracks be removed? And I think we've already answered that as part of this process is the discussion of that and figuring out what's the best way to reintegrate that into this new park. Next one is, this might be an easier one. Simon, someone has asked for the QR code to go back up because the speaker box was covering it. If you wouldn't mind going back to that one for a minute so somebody who wants the opportunity can use that QR code.
Sure, Mary Catherine. Can you not see the upper right-hand corner? Is that too small? Maybe able to move the speaker box for whomever is.
It's visible to me, but it might not be on that person's screen. So I wonder if you could just for a minute go back to the large one just for a minute while we're asking some other questions.
No problem at all. Let me do that quickly.
Thank you so much. Let's take one more from in writing about whether or not there will be fully accessible play areas for children with disabilities. Melissa, I didn't know if you wanted to talk about that. And I don't think we know the answer yet, but I think that's what this is a really exciting part of the process.
Well, I'll just comment generally, and then Simon can probably address it more specifically. But I think that's a really good comment to be raised. Certainly, those I think Simon mentioned that we are designing this with accessibility in mind, all areas of the site, not just the playground, for people of all kinds of levels of ability. So I think that's a great consideration, and we will definitely be thinking about that.
Simon, did you have anything to add?
Absolutely, Melissa. Totally agree. And it's part of our ethos. And I know HRP feels the same way, that we need to design to all abilities here. And certainly, even code-wise, we'll be looking at the potential for making improvements to encourage use of all of these areas for people of all abilities.
Thanks for that. All right, let's go to a live one. The next one we had that raised his hand was Samuel Nixon Jr.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate you sharing the information here. Just a couple quick questions. One is, and I may have missed it if you maybe addressed it earlier, the ecological impacts that the design would have environmentally. Would there be any, or has there been a summary of the kinds of things, both pro and con, that it would have on both the waterfront ecology as well as the things like the absence of some of the the trees or presence of more of them? Has there been any kind of perspective that's been pulled together showing the pros and cons of both the ecological design of the proposed project? And then the other one is in terms of access to the area. I don't know if and again, you may have addressed this too in terms of public transit access, the ease of which in and out for those who would be coming from different parts of the area. Would there be how easy it would be to get to it from public transit perspectives there?
I may take your questions in reverse order, just because I think the second one is they're both important, but is maybe a little bit of a shorter answer. But so the main spine road, what we call Road A, which is the entire length of the western side of the site, is actually going to have 4 bus stops on it. And when the project is built, Dash has looked into reorienting one of their bus lines that currently runs up Bashford and goes up East Abingdon and takes a left on Slaters to actually come through the site. So yes, we will be having public transportation ability to access the site. The next question that you asked, and Melissa, let me know if you would like to take that one or not, but we will be participating in the National Park Service NEPA process as part of our review by them as to what improvements can or cannot be made in the area on the waterfront. So those types of studies will be part of that process.
It was, I guess what I was asking, even broader than just the waterfront, is the entire ecological piece there in terms of the the quality of the air and everything that would be either improved or not, in addition to the waterfront impact.
The city doesn't actually require that kind of a study for land for this particular site, but there is an environmental remediation that's going to happen here. We actually had a meeting on that in January, and up on our website, if you'd like more information about all of those, that information about environmental remediation, that is available from January 30th on the hrpalx.com website, if you'd like to take a look at that.
Yeah, and Mary Catherine, if I may, it's as an industrial site, tree canopy and vegetation is not necessarily at the forefront of what you see here. And it's certainly not going to be the case when this development comes in. There'll be tree-lined streets, native vegetation, really a focus with our civil engineering partners on stormwater management and using best management practices to make sure that we're capturing that and even bringing that to light as an educational opportunity here. We're focused on preserving existing trees that are healthy and removing invasives. And we have done some early calculations on tree canopy increase, and I can tell you that it's in the hundreds of % increase when it comes to the potential for the urban canopy here on site, from the kind of more desolate area that it is as an industrial site to a really tree-lined and tree-covered canopy area, especially with the expansive open spaces here, and our focus on pervious materials throughout these open spaces as well.
Thanks, Simon. Let's go back to some of the written questions. Melissa Cunin, who has had, I think you participated in a number of our presentations before. Nice to see you again. Will we have any ability to see concept 2 before we submit it to the city? The way that we usually work the process is that we're going to solicit all this input, get that together, and then put that submission in. It's not the last submission, Melissa. There will be another preliminary submission, so we'll still have the opportunity to hear input from the community as part of that process. And I think you had a second one Do we have any updated traffic studies to determine if you need a second access to the parkway? We have two accesses to the parkway. We have it at Bashford and Slater's, but that traffic study that you are referencing is actually done as part of the process after a little bit more than half of the building that is authorized on the site has been built. So that will be revisited. We'll do a feasibility study after half of the development that's authorized has been built, or as part of that process. Let's go back to a live question. Tuke Clement, if I'm saying your name right, I apologize. I know I've seen you on our meetings before. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Tukey, that's fine.
Wonderful.
So,
Go for it.
no, I'm just wondering, because I live in Towngate North and the corner of Slater's and Abingdon with Pepco. Have you all been in any conversation with Pepco, and have they coordinated any, I mean, is there any communication?
There's regular communication with Pepco. Melissa, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, we coordinate on a regular basis with Pepco. We're abutters and they have easement rights over certain parts of our property.
So, I mean, is it, okay, so is it gonna remain the same? Or are they planning any design changes and coordinating with all your efforts?
So you're talking about for the substation, if I understand you.
Yes, because it borders Slater's. I come
Sure.
through Slater's. I don't know if I really want to look at it. Okay, that's not your concern, but are
Well,
they doing anything with you, you know?
yes, so that's a great question. So for everyone to understand, we do not, and that's why you see the red line here. The red line is
Right,
out the
right,
property
right.
line.
Yeah.
Pepco is outside of that. So we do not control the substation, and the substation is active and they are using it and they need to continue to use it. Having said that, when we purchased the property, we did get the right to do some architectural screening around the substation. And so that's something that we'll be coordinating with Pepco as we move forward. So we have a little bit of a landscape buffer there that Simon talked about, that we call the Pepco liner affectionately, along the eastern edge of the substation. And then we'll be doing some screening around it to beautify it. But
So when you say
going to continue
screening,
to operate.
okay, so, right, but the screening, does that border Slater's and
It will go
Abingdon?
all, it will likely go all the way around it.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, we had, I think this is a good question. Any consideration about community garden plots? Simon, do you want to take that one?
We always love feedback on program, and certainly community gardens have been in conversation. It's always a difficult process to manage sometimes, but would love your feedback on any tips or tricks you may have to managing community gardens as an asset for the open space.
Thanks. We have another one, Mary Harris, who is a regular on our calls. How are you, Mary? Is the WUNRF an open space element or infrastructure plan element? We love the WUNRF for pedestrian priority for open space. Simon, do you want to take that one?
Absolutely. And let me just read that again. So yeah, the open space, as an open space element, it is part of the infrastructure plan improvements as part of the roadway. However, it's so closely tied to both the waterfront open space and the waterfront plaza that we're kind of reserving the edges of those to be in flux with how the community input comes in and how we want to design those open spaces. But in terms of the materiality and some of the safety regulations, we're working that out right now in the infrastructure DSP.
Thanks, Simon. Let's go to a live question. Christine Bernstein.
Good evening. A longtime resident of Old Town, and many years ago, the airplanes taking off to the south were in the middle of the Potomac River, and it was a minimum of noise. And I know that you have residential as well as retail and leisure activities slated for here. And I know you're very eco-sensitive, but for some reason, many people who are eco-sensitive about the quality of the water and the soil and the invasive plants and all of that, don't pay too much attention to noise, which I think should be factored in. And maybe all of you could be advocates of attempting to address this with the FAA. For the past 5 years, because the FAA went from a radar system to a satellite system, they have forced the planes to take off. When they do take off to the south, they are now, they claim they're hugging the shore of the water. They are not. They are actually flying right over your property, by the way. So you should hope for wind from the north for when you have a lot of big sales coming up, because the wind from the south and those airplanes taking off from National Airport are extremely noisy. So it behooves you to get on the bandwagon with those of us that are involved in some aspects of getting the FAA to move those the flight path back into the middle of the river. Would benefit everybody from an aesthetic perspective to an ecological perspective and to a quality of life perspective.
Melissa, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I would. I think, Christine, we appreciate your perspective, and obviously sounds like it's an issue that you follow very closely. So appreciate your background information. I think we've realized that we've noticed that the flight patterns could probably be improved. I will say, due to the proximity of the site to the airport, that obviously the building designs will be factoring that into them, and they will have to meet certain criteria for sound attenuation for the exterior walls and the windows. We fully intend to meet that, but we are interested in coordinating with other advocates for creative ways that everybody can get what they need, and we can get maybe this area to be a little bit quieter.
Thanks, Melissa. Next question that's in the line is an interesting one. How does abandonment of the rail line work? And will it have to be purchased? Does it revert? But also a nice note. Thanks for the great presentation. Thank you for the question. It is not an uncomplicated process. We've actually been coordinating with the city and other adjacent property owners who are abutting the Norfolk Southern rail line to try to coordinate communications with Norfolk Southern. The city is working through a process to hire a consultant in order to help them do that. The Rails to Trails conversion process is a formal process authorized under federal law, and it requires that you go through what is all of their steps, which includes appraisal of the property, includes a formal abandonment. It's called abandonment that is sought through the Transportation Commission, I believe. But that is a very long and in-depth process that we are going to be attempting to continue to work with Norfolk Southern as part of that process. The next question, the estimated additional population from the project. There were estimates that were made as part of the Old Town North Mall area plan. There is a maximum number of residential units that can be built here, but we don't know the exact number of units until we go through the full development review process. But the maximum number of units is 2,000. I don't think we have any more live questions at the moment, so let's keep going with the written ones. The next one, Tuki, your question is about PEPCO, I think was in writing as well, so thank you for that. There's one about the number of activities that's proposed for the open space and how will we make the decisions as to what will be located in that open space. The concern is that there won't be a cohesive process, and this person is making sure that we're maintaining a mature ecosystem. And so, Simon, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I think it's a great question, and that's why we really truly believe, especially in these linear open spaces, in that experience of a gradient of passive and active program, and making sure that uses are designed and planned together and cohesively. And I think that's part of the design challenge to this project, is making sure that we have a wealth of varied program that can live together harmoniously, but still preserving that naturalistic aesthetic that's so loved on the site today. So that's the design challenge, and we look forward to any feedback that you may have on positioning of different program or concepts of program, and see how we can make this fit together for the most dynamic and usable open space for Old Town.
Thanks, Simon. We do have one. I think Jody Manor was trying to ask a question, but was having some technical difficulties. But so we put it in the question and answer, and it was, how is the working relationship with the National Park Service? And Melissa, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I think we have a great working relationship with the National Park Service. I think both parties see a real opportunity here to improve the condition of the adjacency, our land and their land. Certainly, I think the Park Service believes that there's opportunity for improvement on the section of the Mount Vernon Trail that goes by the pump house, the area that we call the cage. And so we're excited to work with them on configuring, or planning and designing and ultimately executing those improvements. I think it's also exciting that they are planning, they have some of their own capital improvement projects as it relates to the width of the existing Mount Vernon Trail, that I think is going to make it much more user-friendly for the different types of users that are using it today. And I think that's great for its longevity over time. And I think our project is going to provide some additional access to and from it along a stretch of it, frankly, where if you were on the city side, you couldn't get to it. If you were on the trail side, you couldn't get into the city. So I think we have a great opportunity to work together to make some significant improvements to the trail and to restore the prestige to that section of the trail, and to create some improved amenitization for the city of Alexandria.
Thanks. I think that we have a comment here, not a question, that on the railroad line, there's a suggestion of an old car that might be usable on the trail line that kids would love. And so thank you for that comment. Appreciate it. There are a couple of comments on the mix of uses for the blocks and the development itself. And if I might take that, we are not at this particular meeting talking about those blocks. We will have separate community meetings to talk about the development of those blocks as we move the design of those buildings forward. But there is a mix of uses that is planned in the CDD for all of the blocks, and the particular type of uses that will come will be determined by the market forces that are in place when we get to those blocks. There was also a question of when will the demolition of the power plant infrastructure begin? And I think that I would like to point you to that meeting in January, where all of those materials that relate to the abatement and deconstruction of the power plant were presented. And those are available on the hrpalx.com website. So all that information is up there. And as we get more details as it relates to that, we will have further future meetings on that. But the information that's current is in that presentation. Melissa, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I would just say, and I think we talked about this at the tours, the public tours that we did a couple weekends ago. There's still quite a bit to do here in the planning stages of the project. once we, we're talking to you tonight about our open space DSUPs, but we will also have block DSUPs that will be, advanced with the city, and there will be public meetings related to those as well. And then we'll have a final site plan process to go through for all the open space and the blocks and the infrastructure plan. So at this point, we think that will likely take us through the end of 2024. And we expect that the deconstruction of the power plant would start sometime after that.
Thanks. We also had an additional question about soil sampling and testing. And so I would just refer people to that same presentation in January that had all of that information about what has happened so far. So please go and look at that presentation, and it had a series of questions and answers also posted for that community meeting. So that information is available on the website.
Yeah, and I'll just add really quickly, Mary Catherine, on that, just because I know a lot of people who participated in the CDD process are well aware of this, but others who maybe are just joining us now in this open space DSUP process are not. But when we purchased the site, we purchased it in late 2020, and a few months later entered it into what's called the voluntary remediation program that's administered by the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. And so we've been working with them and the City of Alexandria on our sampling plans, and we have sampled a lot of the site. We have not been able to sample areas of the site that are currently under structure, like under the power plants, for obvious reasons. But we are in that process, and we expect to proceed with the remediation of the site, the environmental remediation, in parallel with the development, and bring the site to regulatory closure.
Thanks, Melissa. There is a question about the proposed open space and arts uses, and the concern that will they be redundant with other arts uses or open space uses that are already located in Old Town North, including the existing farmers market. And will there be in the subsidized art spaces, will these be new additions to the arts district or just replacements of existing arts uses? Do you want to answer that one, Melissa, or do you want me to give it a shot?
No, go ahead.
Sure. So I think the answer to that is I don't think we know the answer because I think the goal is to extend the arts district, but currently those arts uses, we're looking to go in to the two other spaces that utilize bonus density haven't started in them yet. And one of the buildings in which one of them is located, actually both of the buildings are slated to be demolished. So those uses need new spots, but they already have existing spots where they're supposed to go. So the likely goal is for new uses, but we want to make sure that for any uses that are, that want to maintain their presence here in Old Town North, that we all work together to find ways to make that work. And Margaret Townsend, I think, had a comment as it relates to the community gardens, that there is a department in the city, the Parks and Rec department, that was an invaluable resource for their farmers market in order to figure out a lot of composting opportunities. I think there's a compostment program pilot that's happening at the Old Town North farmers market now. So Margaret, thank you for the question. We do have another question from Melissa as it relates, Melissa Kunin, as whether with the amount of residents that are coming in with this project, what services will be providing on site so as not to overwhelm the Old Town North neighborhood. And I think, and I'll start, Melissa, and then turn it over to you. The goal here is to provide neighborhood serving retail on site and to enhance both not just for the new residents, but for the existing residents of Old Town North and the whole Alexandria community. I didn't know if you had something else you thought would be helpful to add, Melissa.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons the development has been planned, to be so walkable with features like the Woonerf, and there will be plenty of ground floor retail if you look at our coordinated development district or CDD plan, you can see how the retail is anticipated to be laid out there. So we expect there will be lots to see and do on the site for both the users and residents of the site, but also for our surrounding neighbors.
Mary Harris has a question about one of the benefits of the cage, which is the first time I've ever heard someone mention that there is a benefit to the cage, Mary. It provides shade is her comment. Are there any ideas for how shaded areas will be included in the new open space?
Well, I love
Simon?
Mary's positive thinking about that that infrastructure. So thanks for that, Mary.
Take a look on the bright side.
Yeah, and I do think that trail and shading is an important thing. And we think that tree canopy is going to be a really positive thing for the trail along that edge. Again, keeping the natural aesthetic, keeping the ability to have views out towards the water, especially with the orientation of the north-south trail, focusing on trees to the east and west of that trail. With shade canopy will be a really positive thing. I think our team is also considering areas for shade trellises within the open space as well, likely on the HRP property itself, and specifically for respite and to enhance those views out towards the water.
Thanks, Simon. There is a question about additional green space on the blocks. Was there going to be a requirement for green space or street trees along the roadways and sidewalks? And I would be happy to answer that one. And Sasha, you want to get in from Grove Slade? But yes, our streetscape requirements do have street trees along the streets. There are additional requirements for open space on each block, but that open space can be found or can be located on rooftop terraces or above grade terraces. So there will be additional green space on each block, but likely in that fashion. There is a question about what the long-term plan is for the old Pepco plant itself. The plant information on that, again, as we said, the deconstruction and abatement and deconstruction of that plant, we talked a lot about at that January meeting. I don't know, Melissa, if you wanted to add anything more to what we talked about previously, but I want to make sure people understand all that information is contained in that January meeting.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that we're talking about the right thing, because if you're
Right.
talking about this thing behind me, or you can see it behind Simon as well, that the intent there is that will be deconstructed. But the substation that we talked about earlier, a woman had a question about that. The substation that remains, which is this sort of I don't know, Frankenstein looking thing with all the spoolie things coming out of it, that will remain. That's still Pepco's property, and they are actively using it.
Thank you. We have some other comments. It's always good to hear somebody's comments that someone is thanking us for our commitment to looking into accessibility for those playgrounds. That it's really important for kids as they play to have the ability to run around of all people of all abilities. So that is something that we have been thinking about. Jody had another question about the fence at the end of Slater's Lane, and that actually has already been removed. Or at least the gate has been removed. And so there is now access between the Mount Vernon Trail and Slater's Lane from at that location. So that has already happened. Another question about the industrial heritage. Has consideration or reflecting the history of the site, has consideration been given for the design to instead be consistent with the Old Town history and architecture? And I would start by saying one of the great things about this location is that it is near Old Town, but it is most near Old Town North. and is distant from the architecture located, in the center of town. And I think gives us an opportunity to be a little bit more creative and adaptive for the types of architecture here. But we also are looking to make sure that we are cohesive within our portion of Old Town. So that's a good one. And a thanks, agree with the discussion for providing shade for people both sitting and walking through the park. With that, I think those are all the written questions that we have so far. And I don't see any more hands raised. So anybody tell me if I am missing something. Do we have any questions on the HRP email? Okay.
Checking that.
Not seeing any, Corey?
Nope.
Okay. Let's see. And I think someone just added a question, was this area filled or original grade? I actually don't know that I know off the top of my head that answer, but this area was always more elevated from the water than other parts of the Old Town proper itself. But I don't know the final answer to that question about whether at any particular time they used fill on the site. Okay, let's see if we have any more. Question about the height limits on the new residential buildings. They vary throughout the site. Again, that information is also included in all of our previous materials, but it ranges from 70 feet on one block up to 172 feet on other blocks, but it will not be one height throughout. It's going to be a combination of heights. It's actually one of the varieties that people are, the CDD plan was contemplated in the Old Town North Mill Area Plan, implemented in our CDD concept plan. So it's a variety of those heights from 70 to 172. Okay. With that, I have to say, I think we have answered all of the questions so far, and these have all been really good and helpful questions. It's all been really positive to be able to get your feedback on the plans that we've come up with so far, but also to give us insight as to, excuse me, how we can refine those plans as we move forward. So as we said, we're going to be moving towards that, listening to these comments, getting your comments from the survey, excuse me, apologize, and looking to develop that second concept plan later this year that we will bring back to the community for everybody to see. And then moving forward towards public hearings in early 2024. So thank you everyone for participating, and we look forward to seeing you further as we talk about these public benefits for this wonderful development.